I absolutely adore manga as a medium of art and have been aspiring and slowly trying to make my own and really honing my skills as an artist. In the past few years, I've fell deeply in love with the medium again, and now I read a chapter or two of manga every day. Whether it be shonen, shoujo, yuri, yaoi, isekai, sci-fi, I'm reading it all. I fully believe that art is there to be explored, and I never want to limit myself to just being a guy who only reads a specific type of thing. However, I do still want to experience the depths of a genre, so I set myself a task after finishing the big three of Shonen Jump to read all of the rest. I wanted to read every weekly Shonen Jump manga that has an English translation and hopefully a complete one. I don't know how easy or hard that's going to be once we go back into the weeds of the past, but for now, there's a lot there. I chose this because I have already done some of the legwork because I've been reading Shonen Jump weekly since the start of Dr. Stone in 2017, and I've read basically everything they've put out since in varying capacities. At the moment, I'm caught up on at least 13 different series from Weekly Shonen Jump and have finished 60 between series and one-shots. If you add all the ones I've dropped, it adds another 9. The moral of the story is that I'm nothing if not graceful for the ones that I read. Of those 60, there are more than a few that I finished just because I knew the axe was looming and just wanted to see things through to the end. Some were sad losses where I wished it could have gone on longer, and some were series that I wish went sooner. But despite all this, I still have some glaring holes in my Weekly Shonen Jump knowledge. I've never finished reading classics like Slam Dunk, any Dragon Ball, Dr. Slump, Fist of the North Star, Saint Seiya, etc., etc. I still wanted to experience these seminal works of Shonen Jump, so I set this challenge for myself to accomplish over the course of my lifetime. I almost always have my phone on me so I can read anytime, anywhere. I read manga waiting for a church service to start, waiting for a movie to start, waiting for my shift to end. While I was just lounging at home, you name it, I've probably read manga there at some point. But I also know how vast this task is, so I broke things up for myself, because otherwise you'll see this video in 2040 and it'll be 12 hours long. And I don't want to edit that, so I broke it up into nice little sections for myself. This video will cover A through C according to the Shonen Jump app. I'll do a separate video of the series that aren't currently on the app, but I want to make things easy for myself to start, because there's a nice little list that I can just run down it. My last stipulation is that if I already dropped something, I'm just going to talk about why I dropped it, instead of forcing myself to relive a story I didn't enjoy, unless I dropped it a really long time ago. The moral for most of them is that they are boring, and while I read a lot of manga that aren't anything special, I still value my time to some extent, and if I dropped something, that probably means it was really bad. I'm also not reading anything by Nobuhiro Watsuki because I refuse to engage with his vile presence in my life. Anyways, let's start talking about Weekly Shonen Jump series. A Gravity Boys leads the list, but is not a great representation of the vast majority of the stories I read. There are very few comedy manga in this stretch, and even if there were, I don't think many of them could compare to the utter insanity that is A Gravity Boys. I have to applaud the story for making me truly unable to guess where it would go or what the next chapter would be about. Some had me in stitches and others had my eyes rolling in the back of my head. A Gravity Boy's biggest fault is it is wildly inconsistent. It's also trying to be funny, but humor is subjective and sometimes it just doesn't land. However, I can most certainly give A Gravity Boys the honor of having the strangest axe ending of all time. So many axe stories either try to wrap the story up as quickly as possible or end up staring off into the distance, giving some random life lesson that was vaguely attached to the series. But A Gravity Boys is not most manga, and instead introduces a penis power system that is both the strangest sentence I've ever read and uttered, but somehow works fairly well as a final arc to a comedy manga. I have exactly zero idea how they got that idea for that, but A Gravity Boys went boldly into the night, if nothing else. As of now, the author has not returned to manga since it ended, but I await their return to see whatever insane idea they can come up with next. Akane Banashi is one of the best stories Shonen Jump has ever had. Rakugo continues to have an excellent track record and masterful stories, and Akane Banashi is one that keeps giving and is a nice story about improving in an art and how expression reflects us in the world around us. I can't think of a single bad aspect to Akane Banashi, but I could name off dozens of chapters where the Rakugo story finished and I was either crying my eyes out or had a shiver down my spine. The art and storytelling are firing on all cylinders as we slowly unravel the incident that propelled the story into motion in the first place, while also connecting and understanding the people that were affected by it. I cannot recommend Akane Banashi enough to anyone who wants to read an incredible story in real time. Aliens Area was a pretty typical read, like most of the Axe Shonen Jump manga. It's never awful, but it's rarely anything special. The art is good, but the story of a guy getting powers to protect what he loves is tried and true. And where the greats excelled with that same premise, Aliens Area doesn't quite get its feet off the ground quick enough to do anything meaningful with it. Although having aliens instead of demons was a welcome change of pace, even if they are functionally interchangeable. There are a few Shonen Jump manga that I think make perfect entry points and distillations of shonen manga, and Assassination Classroom is one of them. It takes a unique setting and weaves an excellently paced story that builds people up while maintaining some engaging action. Things can get a bit absurd, but underneath it all is a warm heart that wants you to work towards your best self. One of my favorite aspects of shonen manga are the common themes that underlay all the stories. Assassination Classroom's theme of growth and self-actualization are masterfully done, and despite being a series about killing an alien teacher, Koro Sensei uses every moment to be a teacher to all the students, and by extension to anyone who reads Assassination Classroom. My only complaint is Koro Sensei's pervy antics can be a bit grating at times, but he makes up for it when he strikes a chord with the student and has a positive impact on them for the rest of their lives. I wholeheartedly recommend Assassination Classroom to anyone who wants to get into shonen manga and get a broad understanding of what makes the magazine one that has lasted so long. Astro Royale has just started to find its footing, but it's won me over with its earnest protagonist in a world that is begging to be unearthed. I never experienced any of Tokyo Revengers, and I'd be lying if I said Astro Royale had a strong start, but it's finally found its direction and has won me back. It's hard to say how good it will end up being, but I have been enjoying all of the recent chapters and am eager to read more each week. At the very least, it seems to have found its footing to stand on, so at least we should get to see Iwakui's vision unfold a bit more. And if Tokyo Revengers is a turnoff for you, I'd still say give Astro Royale a chance. If you still don't like it after that, then you probably just have an issue with the author and not the story. Jigoku Raku's creator did not find the footing that the former needed to make it successful. Ayashimon is a bull-headed demon-fighting battle shonen, but one that, while it has some cool fights, is gone before the gang can finally begin to cement their status in the underworld. But the series does make sure to remind you that as long as you have a good support system, you can accomplish anything. So at least there's a good message, even if the story ends with the final arc about to begin. Bakuman is one of my favorite manga of all time. I love any and all stories about creating art, especially manga, and Bakuman was my introduction to my love for that genre of fiction. There's such a love of manga, but also an understanding of the ruthless nature of it present in Bakuman. However, the series balances that with some very simple dynamics, but ones that work wonders. The main romance works so well as a final payoff to the series, and all the side characters finding their respective joy makes it a wonderfully enjoyable read. Creating art is no easy task, but through all the pain and suffering, we can find meaning and joy, and Bakuman understands that alongside all the other great stories about creating art. Eventually, I want to make a full-fledged video on the series because it had a pretty profound impact on my journey as an artist, and I just need to reread it with the mindset of making a video to talk about it to see if it'll hit even more the next time. Barrage was Kohei Horikoshi's manga before My Hero Academia, and the level up from the former to the latter is incredible. Barrage is one of the most typical shonen stories I've ever read. It is all the qualities of a shonen manga, but none are honed enough to make it stand out. It's not boring, but it's not exactly a thrilling read. But whatever Horikoshi took from Barrage's acts that led him to make My Hero Academia, I would love to know, and I'm eternally grateful because it created a fantastic manga. I love Green, so I was eagerly awaiting reading Kento Terasaka's first manga, Beast Children. And unsurprisingly, I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, even if it is a very simple story. It tackles the more down-to-earth subset of sports manga, about how others push us to grow. In this case, it's other rugby players who push each other to become better players. However, I imagine one of the biggest adversaries Beast Children had going against it is that Haikyuu is still being serialized and does a very similar version of this theme, infinitely better. It's kind of hard to compete with one of the greatest fictional stories ever created. I'll never say no to more sports manga in Shonen Jump, but unfortunately for Beast Children, it was tackled before it could get a hand on the ball. Black Cat is a solid story, albeit one that never really wowed me. It's never awful, but it never reaches the heights of some of the greats of Shonen Jump. The main trio of Train, Sven, and Eve are a fun one to spend almost 200 chapters with. They have such lovable chemistry with each other and great banter. However, their dynamic is really the only thing the series has going for it that really stands out. My biggest complaint with the series is that a lot of the villains just don't get fleshed out enough, or are just a bit underwhelming and kind of comically evil without a basis for that or a motivation that makes me motivated to watch them fall. The final villain especially felt very underwhelming with a very plain motivation that never really got me invested in seeing their inevitable conflict with Train and friends. However, to see the career path of Kentaro Yabuki is absolutely insane. This man went from Black Cat to Tolo Ryu, which is an insane jump that I would love to know how that happened, because you got a pretty straightforward shonen action show into just like an ecchi comedy series. Black Clover is a series that is consistently very good, but never quite reached the peaks of Shonen Jump stories. It is an incredibly pure shonen manga that constantly reinforces the idea of surpassing your limits. However, the story rarely feels like it's surpassing its own storytelling potential. I wouldn't say it's predictable, but it never did anything that had me in awe of it. The closest it had was a side fight that had a really cool power interaction that I loved. But beyond that, I'm seated and ready for the ending and hoping Tabata will blow me away at the final hour. But regardless of that, the art has always been great. I just wish the story hooked me more and was just a little more interesting for me personally. I've already talked about Bleach at length in my video on it and the other big three, but the more I sit with the series, the more I appreciate the sheer intensity of the fights. There are a few fights in manga in general that have the aura or intensity of Aizen versus Ichigo or Yawak versus Ichigo. It's a story that the more moments sit in my head, the more I feel like they're some of the coolest things to exist. My love for Aizen as a villain continues to grow the more I think about the sheer, honestly just aura and beauty of him and his place in Bleach as a whole. He is a truly generational antagonist that I will not soon forget, and he really helps keep Bleach in my mind because I have not stopped thinking about him. He is just the coolest. Blue Box fills me with joy every week recently. The main couple have a wonderful dynamic that is only further enhanced by their relationship that bolsters each other to improve as athletes and as human beings. I love stories like that where the main couple can be a cute couple but also are still beneficial to how they grow as human beings independent of their relationship. Taiki and Shinatsu support and encourage each other in a way that I adore while not falling into many of the cliche Shonen Jump romance traits. And I just can't wait to see how Shinatsu and Taiki grow as human beings, athletes, and everything in between. It's a truly special romance and sports manga in Shonen Jump right now, which is two things I love a lot combined into one. Bone Collection is a whole lot of nothing. It's a rare sub-20 chapter axed manga, but one that never gave anything to go off of. This was an early one I read to completion because I knew it was dead on arrival and just wanted to see how it would end. Somehow in 16 chapters it decides to give a time skip finale where somehow racism is defeated, and honestly I would have rathered anything besides a time skip finale. There were no bones collected by reading this, only a throbbing headache of a story. Build King is the first manga I'll talk about that I dropped. From the get-go, it did nothing for me. The art didn't appeal to me at all, the story didn't hook me either. My heart was just telling me, don't waste your time, don't waste your time. Which is wild because apparently this was the next serialized manga by the Toriko author. But judging by their track record post-Toriko, they're really struggling to find a new footing for a story. They got a lot of no-one-shots that have gone nowhere fast. But I wish them the best of luck with their future endeavors, but Build King was not it. It was not that good. I don't really know how to talk about Burn the Witch because the first 5 chapters we had were very whatever. I didn't hate it, but it didn't really hook me in any meaningful capacity. However, we have yet to have any more chapters of it since that initial batch. The story is stuck in this limbo of progression even though it's been 4 years since it started. I know it's not cancelled since Kubo wants to do more of it. My question is, when are we going to get more? I can't really say how good or bad it is because it barely started. It's just perpetually on hiatus until one day we'll get more chapters of it. I'm curious to see where it goes, but it's like judging a entire series worth off the first 3 episodes. You just can't get a full scope of the picture when there's barely anything to go off of. Candy Flurry is fine. I have no interesting remarks about the story. It's a passable battle shonen manga with a vaguely interesting premise of candy weapons. I give it points for a creative power system when what definitely could have been an interesting dynamic with the protagonist having the same power as the final villain. The twist that there are more sinister forces giving the sweets users their power is vaguely interesting, but nothing is ever explored enough to give a good payoff, which is just what's going to happen when you're only 22 chapters long. However, the duo behind it are both back for Shinobi Undercover, and so far it's pretty good. I'm glad they found success after Candy Flurry, and I wait to see what they learned from the acts that will propel them into success, hopefully. Chainsaw Man is one of my favorite manga ever that only continues to climb as Fujimoto weaves a tale that I can never guess where it'll go, but I'm also always intrigued where it ends up. He still finds new ways to hurt Denji, and I wish the utmost happiness on our broken boy. May he find true peace and happiness one day. But to dwell on the part that was actually in Weekly Shonen Jump, because part 2 was serialized in Jump Plus, part 1 was still in Weekly Shonen Jump. Part 1 of Chainsaw Man is incredible. It constantly left me in awe of how and where Fujimoto is able to draw from for plot progression that feels fully unique, but also entirely logical for the story and the characters. The world is not ready for the Rize movie, and I'm not ready to see how Fujimoto will end Chainsaw Man. There's truly no one doing it like Fujimoto, and I mean that as enthusiastically as a human or devil can muster. Cypher Academy is another manga I dropped, but then changed to B1. I will return to once I have a better understanding of the puzzles, and I guess just like Japanese as a whole. I gave up on Cypher Academy because the plot lost me, and since I couldn't really get any of the puzzles, it felt like I was missing half the experience of reading Cypher Academy. One day I'd like to come back to it with the ability to maybe solve the puzzles, or sit with it long enough to earnestly tackle them when they're put in front of me. But for now, I'm not on that level yet. I'm not good enough to read this story. I probably could have grouped Koa with the Akira Toriyama special that I will do later because I have to read like 800 chapters of Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump combined. But this feels the least connected to it all and is a good primer for that future. Koa is a cute little story of some monsters trying to save their friends from a disease alongside a fun, scruffy guy. From the few chapters I've read of Dr. Slump, since I'm already making progress on that Akira Toriyama video, I vibed with the humor more in Koa than I did in Dr. Slump. It's still very much a manga for small children with humor aimed at them, but I had a pleasant time reading Koa, and that's good enough for me. Cross Manage is a very simple manga, but like most down-to-earth sports manga, it wears its heart on its sleeve and its themes there as well. It uses lacrosse to tell a story about having fun playing sports and to give everything in your life your full effort. The team is never the greatest team effort, but at every moment it reinforces that you should be enjoying yourself, even if you're not the greatest team and winning everything. It does get a little more time to develop its characters, but unfortunately it still feels like it was just getting started before the axe swung for its head. It's never a boring story, but it tells a complete enough story that reminds you that even if you don't win, as long as you're having fun, you can never truly lose at anything. And with that, the first batch of Weekly Shonen Jump manga are out of the way. I had already read a good number of these beforehand, but it did let me catch up to Black Clover and dip my toes into some earlier Shonen Jump series with Black Cat. The biggest thing I noticed from reading this much is how it flies by with 20-page chapters. Once an arc gets its footing and the action begins, I start burning through chapters with reckless abandon. I hit the 100-chapter limit a couple times reading Black Clover because, despite not being one of my all-time favorite Shonen Jump series, it was an immensely entertaining read. But for all the thrilling reads, there were still the axed manga that, despite being several hundred chapters shorter, felt infinitely longer. Which just goes to show why they never found the light of a more fruitful run. But there are plenty more stories like that to cut through, but first, there's an Akira Toriyama-sized wall to overcome, probably in tandem with another separate section, so I don't have to endure almost 1,000 chapters of Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball in one go. But that's a problem for future me, so now I can revel in experiencing some more peak shonen manga. Let me know what you thought of all these manga if you've read them all. There's a pretty diverse range of releases. We've got some like 90s and some early 2000s, some 2010s, some more current ones. So I imagine you've probably read at least one of them. If you haven't, I would very much recommend it because it's good and you should just read more stories in general. There will be more of this, so if you want to subscribe for more, when will the next part come out? I don't know, because I have to read everything still. The next gap breaks for where I'm going to cut things are up in the air. There's a lot of chunks where it's a lot of axed manga, but I want to have a good balance of axed manga and, like, you know, some actually good stories. But the Akira Toriyama one is just going to be a separate thing because it is basically just reading One Piece, but it's two separate stories, and I've already read like 40 chapters of Dr. Slump, and it's a lot. It's a very kiddie manga. But you'll find out more about that when I finish it and make a video on it. So until then, goodbye.